During the darkest years of World War II, while German U-boats terrorized the Atlantic as invisible wolves of the depths, a silent revolution was being orchestrated in Allied shipyards and command centers. What few knew was that the definitive response to the submarine threat would not come from a single miraculous weapon or an isolated technological breakthrough, but from something far more devastating, a lethal coordination between ships and aircraft that would turn hunters into prey. The feared U-boats, which had sunk more than 3,500 merchant and military ships by 1943, were about to face a perfectly synchronized war machine that would forever change the balance of power in the oceans. The smell of burnt diesel oil and the deafening sound of depth charge explosions would echo across the seas. But this time, it would be the German submarines experiencing the terror of the depths. Starting in 1943, a new reality would emerge from the turbulent waters of the Atlantic. The hunter-killer groups were not just a naval tactic, they were a coordinated death sentence that would reduce the U-boat fleet from a dominant force to wreckage scattered across the ocean floor. In the early years of the war, U-boat commanders navigated the Atlantic waters with almost arrogant confidence. Karl Dönitz, the architect of German submarine warfare, had developed the wolfpack tactic that seemed invincible. Groups of submarines attacking Allied convoys in devastating coordination. Between 1940 and 1942, the numbers were terrifying for the Allies. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank 1,664 ships, totaling more than 7.8 million tons of vital cargo. Kapitänleutnant Otto Kretschmer, nicknamed the Silent Bull, had sunk 44 ships before being captured, while Günther Prien became a legend by penetrating the Scapa Flow naval base and sinking the battleship HMS Royal Oak. For the Germans, the Atlantic had become their private lake, where each Allied convoy represented easy targets sailing in predictable formations. The characteristic sound of torpedoes cutting through the water, followed by devastating explosions, had become the soundtrack of maritime terror. But while the U-boats celebrated their victories, a radical transformation was being gestated in naval command centers in London and Washington, where admirals studied every attack pattern, every submarine route, every weakness in the seemingly impenetrable armor of the German war machine. The Allied response began to take shape through the brilliant mind of Admiral Ernest King of the U.S. Navy and his British counterparts. They realized that combating submarines individually was like trying to catch ghosts in the ocean. The revolutionary solution came in the form of lethal coordination. Specialized groups composed of an escort carrier at the center, surrounded by 4 to 6 destroyers or frigates in a defensive formation. The USS Bogue, one of the first converted escort carriers, became the prototype of this new weapon. At 512 feet in length and capable of carrying 28 aircraft, it could launch Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters and Grumman TBF Avenger bombers on patrol missions covering a radius of 200 nautical miles. The concept was simple but revolutionary. While the destroyers protected the carrier and provided anti-submarine firepower with their Mark 7 depth charges, the aircraft extended the group's eyes far beyond the horizon. Each Avenger carried 4 350-pound Mark 47 depth charges and was equipped with ASV Mark III radar, capable of detecting a periscope 15 miles away. What the Germans did not anticipate was that this combination would create a detection and destruction network that would make it impossible for U-boats to operate with the impunity of previous years. The first real test of this new doctrine came in May 1943, when the USS Bogue and its hunter-killer group departed Norfolk on its inaugural mission. Commander Giles Short, a World War I veteran, led a crew that had trained tirelessly for this moment. Aboard the Bogue, Avenger pilots had practiced coordinated attacks against simulated submarine targets until every move became instinctive. The centimeter radar installed on the aircraft represented a technological advantage that the Germans did not yet fully understand. When the group encountered its first U-boat, the U-569, commanded by Oberleutnant Hans-Peter Hinsch, the coordination was lethal and precise. The Avengers detected the submarine 18 miles away, still on the surface recharging its batteries. Hinsch, a veteran with 12 ships sunk to his credit, ordered an emergency dive, but it was too late. The destroyers USS George E. Badger and USS Clemson converged on the position, while the Avengers marked the spot with smoke buoys. The coordinated attack lasted only 23 minutes. 47 depth charges were dropped in a calculated pattern that turned the U-569 into metallic wreckage at 400 feet depth. For Hinsch and his 43 crew members, there were no survivors. It was the first of many. The effectiveness of the hunter-killer groups lay not only in their superior technology, but in the almost telepathic coordination between their components. Captain Daniel Gallery, commander of the USS Guadalcanal, developed tactics that became the standard for all subsequent groups. His aircraft operated in specific search patterns. The expanding square searches covered areas of 100 square miles in meticulous spirals, while the barrier patrols created impenetrable aerial curtains along known U-boat routes. VHF radio communication allowed instant coordination between aircraft and surface ships. When an Avenger detected a submarine contact, it immediately transmitted precise coordinates to the destroyers, which could reach speeds of 35 knots for interception. The QHB sonar installed on the destroyers had a range of 2,500 yards and could maintain contact with submerged submarines even in rough seas. The Hedgehog, a 24-tube anti-submarine projectile launcher, replaced conventional depth charges on many ships, allowing precise attacks without losing sonar contact. Each 65-pound projectile exploded only upon direct contact with the submarine's hull, eliminating premature explosions that alerted U-boats to imminent attacks. This combination of technology and tactics turned each encounter into an almost guaranteed death sentence for German submarines. The numbers began to tell a devastating story for the Kriegsmarine. In June 1943, just 1 month after the full implementation of the hunter-killer groups, 17 U-boats were sunk in the North Atlantic. In July, another 23 German submarines were sent to the ocean floor. Admiral Dönitz, observing the increasing losses of his precious submarine fleet, began to realize that something fundamental had changed in anti-submarine warfare. The U-487, a supply submarine vital for long-range operations, was located and destroyed by the USS Core Group in July 1943. Without these milk cow submarines, U-boats lost their ability to operate far from European bases. Oberleutnant Heinrich Schröteler, commander of the U-667, described in his last radio report the feeling of being hunted by invisible ghosts that appear out of nowhere. His submarine was sunk 3 hours later by aircraft from the USS Card. The psychology of submarine warfare had completely reversed. The silent hunters now lived in constant terror, knowing that every time they surfaced to recharge batteries or transmit reports, they could be signing their death sentence. The sea, which had once been their ally, had become a deadly trap where hunter-killer groups patrolled relentlessly, turning each submarine mission into a Russian roulette with increasingly lower chances of survival. The technology behind the hunter-killer groups represented a revolution in naval warfare that the Germans fatally underestimated. The ASV Mark III radar, operating at a 3-centimeter frequency, was practically undetectable by the German Metox and Naxos equipment. While U-boats relied on their primitive radar detectors, Allied aircraft observed them without being detected, like invisible predators studying their prey. The LORAN navigation system allowed hunter-killer groups to maintain precise positions even in zero-visibility conditions, coordinating attacks with mathematical precision. The Fletcher-class destroyers, the backbone of these groups, carried 600 depth charges each and could launch them in devastating patterns calculated by primitive analog computers. The USS England, an escort destroyer, set a lethal record by sinking 6 Japanese submarines in just 12 days in the Pacific, demonstrating the deadly effectiveness of this new doctrine. Each hunter-killer group operated as a single organism, where aircraft served as eyes, destroyers as muscles, and the escort carrier as the coordinating brain. TBS, talk between ships radio communication, allowed instant coordination, while CIC, Combat Information Center, plotting systems created a real-time tactical picture that made it impossible for submarines to escape once detected. This technological synergy transformed submarine hunting from a game of hide-and-seek into a scientific and relentless execution. The psychological impact on U-boat commanders was devastating and immediate. Veterans like Korvettenkapitän Reinhard Hardegen, hero of the drumbeat operations off the American coast, reported in post-war interrogations the growing sense of despair that took hold of submarine crews. "We were no longer hunters," said Hardegen. "We were rats in a maze, waiting for the cats not to find us." The average survival time of a U-boat on patrol dropped from 18 months in 1942 to just 4 months in 1943. Entire crews developed war neuroses, with men refusing to go to the periscope or panicking at the slightest sound of distant propellers. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Lüth, one of the German submarine aces, described in his diary the transformation of his men. "They don't sleep, don't eat properly, and jump at every sound. The ocean has become our cemetery, and we are the grave diggers of ourselves." The submarine bases of Lorient, La Pallice, and Saint-Nazaire once centers of celebration and camaraderie, became somber places where crews departed knowing they would likely not return. The farewell ritual changed. There were no more boasts or promises of glorious victories, only silent hugs and looks that said it all. The psychological warfare had completely reversed, and the hunter-killer groups not only destroyed submarines, but also the morale and determination of the entire German submarine force. Operational data revealed a statistical transformation that bordered on the impossible. In 1942, the Allies lost 7.8 million tons of ships to just 87 U-boats sunk. In 1943, after the full implementation of the hunter-killer groups, 237 U-boats were destroyed, while Allied losses fell to 3.2 million tons. The USS Guadalcanal, under Captain Daniel Gallery's command, set records for lethal efficiency. Its group sank 13 submarines in 6 months of operation. The USS Bogue group destroyed 12 U-boats in consecutive operations, including the famous U-118, commanded by veteran Werner Chigen, which was literally torn apart by a coordinated attack from 6 aircraft. Each hunter-killer group cost approximately $45 million to equip and operate, but destroyed an average of $15 million in enemy submarines per month of operation. The math was relentless. For every dollar invested in the hunter-killer groups, the Allies eliminated $3 in German naval capability. The average time between detection and destruction of a U-boat dropped from 4 hours in 1942 to just 47 minutes in 1943. This lethal efficiency was not just the result of superior technology, but of coordination that transformed multiple combat platforms into a single devastating weapon, capable of turning the oceans into German submarine cemeteries. The intact capture of the U-505 by the USS Guadalcanal Group in June 1944 represented the pinnacle of the hunter-killer group's efficiency and a devastating psychological blow to the Kriegsmarine. Oberleutnant Harald Lange, commander of the U-505, was sailing on the surface 150 miles off the coast of West Africa when aircraft from the Guadalcanal detected him. The attack coordination was a symphony of lethal precision. While the Avengers maintained visual contact, the destroyer USS Chatelain dropped depth charges in a calculated pattern that severely damaged the submarine without completely destroying it. Lange, realizing that destruction was inevitable, ordered the ship abandoned, but the American crew of the USS Pillsbury boarded the submarine before it could sink. For the first time in the war, the Allies captured a U-boat intact with all its codes, communication equipment, and operational documents. Captain Gallery kept the capture in absolute secrecy, allowing the Allies to intercept and decode German communications for months without the Kriegsmarine suspecting the compromise. This operation demonstrated that the hunter-killer groups were not just machines of destruction, but instruments of psychological warfare and intelligence that could capture strategic prizes intact. For U-boat commanders, the news of the capture, when it finally leaked, represented the confirmation of their worst fears. Not only were they being hunted and killed, but also captured alive, with all the secrets of their submarine warfare exposed to the enemy. The final collapse of the German submarine threat came with numbers that told a story of systematic annihilation. Of the 170 U-boats that participated in the war, 785 were sunk by the Allies, with the hunter-killer groups responsible for more than 60% of these destructions after 1943. The mortality rate among U-boat crews reached 75%, the highest of any Wehrmacht branch. The last major German submarine success occurred in September 1944, when the U-482 sank 2 ships in convoy but was immediately located and destroyed by a hunter-killer group in less than 2 hours. Admiral Dönitz, in his post-war memoirs, admitted that the hunter-killer groups turned our submarines from sea wolves into lambs for the slaughter. U-boat production continued until the end of the war, but crews knew they were embarking on suicide missions. Submarine bases that once sent out 20 U-boats per month in 1942 could dispatch only 3 or 4 in 1944, not due to a lack of submarines, but due to a lack of crews willing to face almost certain death. The Atlantic Ocean, which Dönitz had dreamed of turning into a cemetery for the Allied merchant navy, became the grave of his own submarine ambitions. The hunter-killer groups not only won the Battle of the Atlantic, they completely redefined the concept of naval warfare, proving that lethal coordination between different combat platforms could turn feared hunters into defenseless prey, forever changing the balance of power in the world's oceans.